Chapter 1571. The first lesson. The 30 members of Volt Shadow's inaugural training class were gathered in a classroom at the academy that morning. It was said to be a classroom, but it was actually a larger stepped conference room. The 30 mutants sat spread out, and now they looked like a complete different person from a month ago. They were wearing special combat uniforms, and on their left chests, they had a black E character tattooed on them. Everyone's spirits were very full, and since their abilities had been greatly improved in just 1 month, pride was written all over their faces. Even a month ago, some of them had only mastered crude methods of using their supernatural abilities, and were limitedly stronger than ordinary people. However now, they had all long ago chosen themselves out of the ranks of ordinary people. We are the pride of heaven. Many members of the Volt Shadow troop thought so. Only Lu Dehai and the others, due to the fact that they had followed Zhang Yi for a long time and were in the higher echelons of the 3 major bases, looked much more composed. Compared to those trainees who had just recently awakened their supernatural abilities, they were more aware of how big the gap was between their strength today compared to those in the shelter. They did not yet have the capital to be arrogant. However, whether it was Xiao Honglian, Xing Tian or Lu Dehai, all of them were incredibly eager to become Zhang Yi's right-hand man one day, just like Yu Jiguang and Su Chunlei. Lu Dehai raised his wrist and peeled open his sleeve, revealing a solid gold Patek Philippe wristwatch to look at the time. 8:50, it's almost time. Although today's various intelligent systems were very advanced and there was absolutely no need for an old-fashioned mechanical product like a watch to tell time, Lu Dehai was still enamored with it. Before the end of the world, he was a poor fisherman. He had only seen such luxury items worth millions of dollars on TV. So now, when there was a chance to get these once unattainable luxuries, he would collect them with great fervor. Nowadays, his room was almost stuffed with these things. Even though they were no longer worth anything nowadays, they would still give him a sense of satisfaction. Next to him, an ordinary-looking man with long messy hair came over. "Brother Dehai, what are you looking at?" "Watching the time." Lu Dehai lowered his sleeve, not too embarrassed to let people see his wristwatch. After all, this kind of thing, nowadays only he still plays with it. He looked towards the doors of the classroom and said softly, "Yesterday, the instructor said that he would arrange a cultural class for us today. I'm curious as to what exactly is going to be taught to us." The long-haired man named Ruan Ping rubbed his bearded chin and said with a puzzled expression, "Yeah, aren't we being trained to fight? What's the point of taking culture classes?" Not far away, Xing Tian opened his mouth and laughed playfully. "Hey, old Zhang can't be exempted from this nowadays. It's just like those companies in the past, they are so idle every day that they have to do all this nonsense. Thinking that they can cohesion subordinates, but everyone is bored to death. Let's just listen to it." For this kind of cultural lesson, he was simply too lazy to listen. Xing Tian was ready to play a movie at the bottom of the room using his smart device. Anyway, it would be okay to mix it up until the end of the class. Lu Dehai, however, shook his head. "No, it's not that simple." He frowned, thinking very seriously, Mr. Zhang is a very smart person, he won't play with this kind of formalism. No matter what he does, there must be a profound reason for it. Xing Tian bristled, "You're being a bit of an idolater." Lu Dehai laughed, "Mr. Zhang is indeed my idol." The two were chatting when the doors of the classroom opened. Bai Li Changqing's burly body appeared at the doors, and all Volt Shadow's trainees immediately sat up straight, their backs erected like poles. After a month of training, Bai Li Changqing was not as good-tempered as he was in front of Zhang Yi. To these trainees, he really did drill them to death. Torturing these people beyond recognition, but it did allow them to rapidly improve their combat abilities. Bai Li Changqing stood still at the doors, his gaze coldly swept across the classroom, and it made every trainee feel as if an on was on their backs. At this time, from behind Bai Li Changqing came another figure. A man who was only about 1 meter 6, with an unassuming appearance with neatly combed hair, wearing a thick overcoat then walked onto the podium. His coat was large and he was short, so he looked more or less comical, like a child stealing the clothes of the adults in his family. Xing Tian whispered, "Isn't this Ma Wenjing?" After Ma Wenjing came to Tianhai City, he was assigned to Xing Tian's Qingpu base and had been helping Xing Tian manage the base. For such a long time, the two of them worked well together, and under Ma Wenjing's professional management mode, they had made the Qingpu base presentable. Ma Wenjing walked onto the podium, smilingly scanning the unruly mutants below. He clasped his hands together and said with a smile, "Everyone, I am your ideological and political class teacher, Ma Wenjing. I believe some of the students below the stage already know me. From today onwards, I will be conducting lessons related to ideology and politics for all of you." Hearing these words, the mutants below couldn't help but mutter. Some of them spat out in whispers. "Sure enough, it's this again. How boring. No fun. Is this treating us like 3-year-old children?" None of them were children anymore. They didn't know how many times they had heard and seen this similar routine, and no one would take it seriously at all. Only Gao Tianwu, who had just returned from Xinjiang, however, seriously took out his smart device, intending to record Ma Wenjing's lecture and reply to learn it over and over again. As a latecomer to Tianhai City, he didn't have much seniority, so he had also been keeping a relatively low profile since his return. Thick and thin, one hit, this was his style of doing things. The expression on Ma Wenjing's face, however, became serious. As you all know, after the Ice Age descended, the humans of the entire planet lived a very difficult life. A large number of our compatriots died in that harsh disaster. And we are lucky to have survived until now. But in these 3 years, has the world really been as peaceful as we thought? Ma Wenjing looked at the people present. Everyone couldn't help but bow their heads and begin to ponder. Although they hadn't left Tianhai City, it didn't mean that they knew nothing about the outside world. This was certainly not without Yang Xinxin deliberately spreading some news. There was no need to deliberately exaggerate anything because the outside itself was extremely dangerous. In the region outside of Tianhai City, despite Blizzard City holding the dominant position, however, the entire Jiangnan region was filled with cutthroat mutants in various places. Those vicious insubordinates were cruel beyond measure, killing as if they were eating truly literally. Using people as food had become a common state of affairs in years of scarce resources like the end times. And outside of the Jiangnan region, it only got worse. The reason why they had been able to survive for 3 years peacefully and had barely encountered any life-threatening crises was simply because they lived in Tianhai City. Chapter 1572 For the Supreme Glory. Ma Wenjing said, "That's right, I'm sure everyone has thought of the reason. The reason why we are able to obtain a safe existence is because we have a great patron saint in Tianhai City. Mr. Zhang Yi." These words sounded like utter bragging, but none of the people present could refute them as they nodded their heads, agreeing with Ma Wenjing's statement from the bottom of their hearts. Because of Zhang Yi's hefty battle record today, even an exhaustive amount of overflowing praise would not be too much. It was because of his existence that Tianhai City had become a pure land after the end times. Ma Wenjing continued, "The Volt Shadow Troop was established in the hope of unearthing more talents. Under the leadership of Mr. Zhang Yi, we will protect Tianhai City as a peaceful home. It is also to protect ourselves. Nowadays, looking around the world, Mr. Zhang Yi is one of the mutants with the most top-notch strength. Not just anyone has the chance to be by his side. You guys were able to get this chance to join Volt Shadow. It's only because Mr. Zhang Yi is mindful of old friendships and has taken special care of you." The 30 people below these words still had no way to refute them. Talents? There might not be many outstanding mutants, but amongst Blizzard City, there were quite a few people with strengths like Baili Changqing. One word from Zhang Yi and they would scramble to come and join the Volt Shadow Troop. Ma Wenjing said, "So, the purpose of the ideological and political lesson is simple. I'll tell you all openly and honestly that 1. is that troops with ideological guidance will possess greater discipline and combat capabilities. Secondly, it is to establish a mutant troop centered around Mr. Zhang Yi, one that is absolutely loyal to Mr. Zhang Yi. Everyone was an adult, there was no need to cover up. It was rather easier for everyone to accept it when it was said more clearly at times like this. However, no one said anything, as many of these great ways were spoken by many people. If Ma Wenjing only had these two tricks up his sleeve, at most, he would be a human speaker, delivering words for Zhang Yi and the other asylum executives. Ma Wenjing was not flustered as he pressed his hands on the lecture table. Starting today, once every 3 days, we will conduct a lesson. And as a mutant troop belonging exclusively to Mr. Zhang Yi, I will formulate a set of rules and regulations that are uniquely yours. Ma Wenjing said, clenching his right hand into a fist and placing it on his chest near his heart. From today onwards, this action will become the symbol of the Volt Shadow Troop. Clench your right fist above your heart and say for the supreme glory. Come on, everyone follow me in this movement. Ma Wenjing looked at the crowd with an encouraging gaze. Bai Li Changqing, on the other hand, naturally placed his right fist on his chest and then looked at the 30 people. Seeing this, the crowd also began to learn this movement one after another, placing their right fists on their chests. Ma Wenjing said, Supreme represents His Excellency Zhang Yi. From now on, no one is allowed to call that one by his first name. This is to show respect for him. Now, please follow me and shout dash for the supreme glory. Ma Wenjing's expression all became much more serious, his face devoid of smiles, his voice dry and clear. The voices below then followed sparsely. For the supreme glory. Ma Wenjing continued to look at the crowd with an encouraging expression as he shouted once more, for the supreme glory. For the supreme glory. Once, twice, 3 times, the crowd went from being embarrassed and unimpressed at the beginning to involuntarily increasing their voices at the back. In the middle of the entire classroom, the voices of 32 people were sandwiched together and filled with power. Under the influence of this kind of atmosphere, it would make people involuntarily want to raise their voices, so as to blend in with the group. Otherwise, one would appear out of place. Ma Wenjing nodded and said in encouraging words, Good, this is very good. From today onwards, all members of the Volt Shadow Troop must greet each other in this manner when they meet. We have to engrave this action, these words, inside our minds. Xing Tian spread his hands somewhat breathlessly. Wait. The gazes of the crowd looked at Xing Tian along with Ma Wenjing. Only a breathless smile could be seen on his face. Ma Wenjing. After noticing Bai Li Changqing's serious expression, Xing Tian changed his words and said, Oh no, Teacher Ma. What I want to say is that it's fine to mess around with this kind of childish routine as a ritual. But letting us do this kind of embarrassing thing every day, this is too much child's play. Ma Wenjing's face instantly became gloomy. Xing Tian. Please watch your words. Xing Tian was startled by Ma Wenjing's sudden outburst as he turned his head to look around at the other trainees, many of whom were looking at him with disgruntled expressions. It seemed that people disliked the fact that he had stood out as a standout, disturbing everyone's freshly high spirits. Don't you guys think this is strange? Ma Wenjing took a deep breath before reaching out and pointing towards the doors. Xing Tian. What do you think the Volt Shadow Troop even is? It is a private troop that exclusively belongs to the world's topmost powerhouse, His Excellency Zhang Yi. In the future, our group is going to stand at the apex of the world, and be renowned throughout the human community. Such a troop must establish mature and tough rules, and you're just treating it like child's play. Now, please get out from inside this classroom right now. Ma Wenjing reached out and pointed towards the doors of the classroom. Xing Tian did not expect that Ma Wenjing, who had always been amiable with him in the past, would lose his temper this much. It was obvious that this was just a cultural education class that had little meaning and went through the formalities. However, when he cast a gaze at the others seeking approval, he realized that more and more people were looking at him in an unfavorable light. Xing Tian, get out of here. You shouldn't be disturbing us at a time like this. Do you like to be the outcast that much? Xing Tian's face was a bit ugly, and for a time, inside the entire classroom, everyone was rejecting him. Even though some people didn't express their attitudes, they wouldn't come forward to support him. Xing Tian resentfully walked out from the back door of the classroom. After he left, many people had heartfelt smiles on their faces. It was as if kicking Xing Tian, a guy who didn't fit into the group, out of the classroom was a major victory for their collective. For the first time, they had a strong sense of organizational identity towards Volt Shadow as an organization. Good, now the troublemaker has been kicked out by us. Our course continues. The Volt Shadow Troop will become the glory of the entire human race, and you will be admired by billions of people. And all of this is based on your following behind the Supreme. His light will envelop you. Therefore, the first section of our course on this trip is the first commandment that all must follow from now on: take the will of the Supreme as the supreme directive. Chapter 1573, Absorbing the Population. Mao Wenjing's ideological and political lesson began amongst the first members of the Volt Shadow Troop. When people were integrated into a collective, it was like water flowing inside an ocean, quickly creating a sense of collective honor due to common goals and beliefs. Or it could be said that in such a post-apocalyptic world, faith was a very good placebo, allowing people to find a goal to survive and comfort their souls. And outside the classroom, Xing Tian, who had been kicked out, scratched his head in disbelief, feeling puzzled. However, when his ears heard that neat voice inside the classroom, his heart felt a little empty. It was as if he had been excluded from the whole of Volt Shadow. Unable to help it, a feeling of trepidation began to arise within him. Even though he himself was unwilling to admit it, the thought that from now on, there was a possibility that he would face rejection from the entire Volt Shadow Troop, his heart was vaguely uneasy. After the end of the lesson, everyone walked out of the classroom with a smile on their face. After all, compared to the boring and difficult training, this kind of class was much easier. Mao Wenjing was very eloquent and spoke well, and they began to enjoy this kind of course. And when they saw Xing Tian outside the classroom, all of them had some strange expressions. Xing Tian, how does it feel to be outside? A mutant asked with a smile, and the faces of the people next to him immediately showed a derisive expression. Xing Tian pulled the corner of his mouth, go play with yours. He turned his head away, ignoring the taunts of his teammates. Invisibly, it was as if a thin invisible barrier had appeared between them. Xing Tian did not leave, but kept waiting outside the classroom. He waited until finally Mao Wenjing walked out of the classroom before he greeted him. Mr. Ma, can I talk to you? Xing Tian said. Mao Wenjing looked at Xing Tian and said with a smile, of course. That? I'm sorry about what just happened in class. You should know me, I didn't mean anything against you. Mao Wenjing looked deeply at him, then said very seriously, Xing Tian, we are also considered old friends. But the past in Qingpu base was the past, and now you are a member of Volt Shadow, while my identity is that of a teacher. So I hope that when it comes to the classroom, you will be able to correct your attitude. Saying this, Mao Wenjing spread a smile. Of course, after class, we are still friends. Xing Tian nodded. I know. Although he said this on his lips, he was still a bit unconvinced in his heart. Mao Wenjing continued, you should understand that the Volt Shadow Troop is a troop that the Supreme spent a lot of effort to form. That's why the importance of this place is self-evident. If you don't cooperate with the course here, aren't you going against the Supreme? Xing Tian's heart thumped. Although he and Zhang Yi were old classmates, he knew Zhang Yi's character very well. If anyone failed to follow the rules on such an important matter, Zhang Yi would not be polite in the slightest. He hurriedly said, I know that I did something wrong today, I will change from now on. Please don't ever tell him about this matter. Ma Wenjing looked at Xing Tian with a deep and playful smile on his face. I can give you another chance. You have to grasp it well. He reached out and patted Xing Tian on the shoulder before turning around and leaving. The next day, everyone realized that Xing Tian had produced a noticeable change. Instead, he became the one who was the most active in maintaining order in Volt Shadow. Shouting slogans, he shouted the loudest, and when faced with those Volt Shadow members who had loose attitudes, he would speak out to remind them. In the face of such a change in him, Ma Wenjing even gave to direct encouragement, praising his loyalty to the Volt Shadow organization as well as to Zhang Yi in front of everyone. In everything that happened here, Zhang Yi was actually not aware of it at all. He was very busy right now and didn't have the time to manage all the matters of the entire Tianhai city. Hence, it was always Yang Xinqin who was in charge of all this, including Ma Wenjing's training, which was also under her guidance. Right now, Zhang Yi's main concern was the creation of the Tianhai City Sanctuary. Taking the shelter as the center, it was continuously expanding towards the surrounding in a circular shape, gradually expanding the base's area and defensive capability. Moreover, now that he had broken his previous inherent thinking, in order to solve the problem of labor shortage, he began to liberalize the borders of Tianhai City, allowing people from other cities to migrate here. The effect of this practice was immediate. It went without saying that Zhang Yi's fame was heard throughout the Jiangnan region by every single person. However, in the past, he did not allow people from other cities to enter Tianhai City to avoid some troublemakers from causing chaos here. He himself was too lazy to be the maintainer of order in the region, so directly closing the city was the best option. However, in order to create the Tianhai City Sanctuary and also for the aerospace engineering program that might take place in the future, he would need to increase the number of laborers on hand. As soon as the news of opening Tianhai City spread out, it quickly attracted a large number of outsiders. Anyone who was eager to be sheltered by Zhang Yi. In just over a month's time, the population of Tianhai City had skyrocketed from 10,000 to 80,000. And there were still people who were a little farther away who were arriving one after another. Tianhai City was very rich in resources nowadays, and could stabilize its population within 300,000 and provide more favorable conditions for survival. Under extreme conditions, it could accommodate 1 million people. However, Zhang Yi's short-term plan was to receive 100,000 people first, and then continue to open the borders after the initial plan was successful. Solving the two major problems of population survival, food and energy, was not a big problem for him. After his cultivation, a group of ability users with auxiliary attributes had appeared in Tianhai City. Similar to Li Jian, ability users with plant attributes could accelerate the cultivation of crops. The mutants in the coastal region, on the other hand, were able to enter the ocean in an unprotected state to fish, which provided Tianhai City with a large and constant supply of food. Lu Dehai had once reported to Zhang Yi. Lu Dehai said, "I am a fisherman by birth. In the past, when I was at the seaside, one person could go out to sea and catch 1,000 pounds of fish in half a month. The entire Chaoyu base has thousands of young adults who can go out to sea to fish, and based on 1,000 pounds per person, we'll be able to hit millions of pounds of fish in half a month." Zhang Yi clapped his hands after hearing this, exclaiming Oxbeer. "However, I think it would be more efficient to go into the deep sea with a fishing boat. The existing machinery is already outdated, and the era of fuel oil has officially passed. In the future, we will use Yuan stone to outlaw it. I will have Liu Karen remodel the ships in the harbor so that you don't need to worry about energy. You guys can go out to sea and fish like you did in the past." Amidst such low temperatures, there were too few fish along the coast, and to fish in large quantities one still had to enter the deep sea. Chapter 1574 Their Experiment. The construction of Tianhai City was in full swing. Once Zhang Yi started to decide to build the Tianhai City Sanctuary, then he had to start from every aspect. Cultivating his own mutant troops, building more bases to accommodate a larger population, as well as building the city. And for most of these matters, he left it to Yang Xinxin and Zhou Qi to arrange. Zhou Qi was a highly educated returee to the sea, and Yang Xinxin's IQ was needless to say, the two were quite talented in this area. As for Zhang Yi himself, he put more energy into improving his own strength. The more he studied Heart Sutra, the more he felt the subtlety of the book. If anything, in the past, his thoughts on how to improve his strength was like a person trying to find the way forward in the midst of a fog. But Heart Sutra was like giving him a light that could help him illuminate the path ahead, greatly shortening his time. The world did not go round with Zhang Yi at the center. While he was busy, others were also putting in their best efforts to improve their strength. The appearance of the Yuan stone vein was not a coincidence, and there were more magical things that had begun to surface in this world. Just as Zhang Yi thought, although most of the Yuan stone veins in Ghost Valley had been snatched away by him, Xinjiang region still had other underpinnings in place and could still maintain its daily operations. On the other hand, on the Blizzard City side, the underground of the originally quiet city was also surging with dark tides. Underneath the new command center, amongst the laboratories of the research department, Zhu Jing went vertically down the long vertical ladder to the space of 100 meters underground. He wore a straight military uniform and walked towards the front with a dragon stride. The researchers inside the lab were all wearing white coats, each busy. When they saw Zhu Jing coming, they only greeted him. Zhu Jing didn't think anything of it, and just walked straight along the familiar path to the deepest part of the lab. In front of a glass window made of organic material that was dozens of meters long and nearly 10 meters high, Li Lingxue, the minister of the scientific research department, stood there with her hands clasped around a bosom that could not be grasped with one hand, her long hair casually coiled up with a ballpoint pen, and her eyes under the black-framed glasses stared dead ahead at the laboratory. Zhu Jing walked over, his eyes could not hide his nervousness and excitement. It had been a long time since this high-powered old man had had difficulty suppressing his emotions like today. Inside the laboratory, inside a huge transparent tank, a beautiful girl with naked body and long hair floating like seaweed was quietly suspended in the green nutrient solution. Her eyes were closed, as if she was a sleeping elf from the legend. "How about it? Is our experiment finally going to succeed?" Zhu Zheng's voice trembled a little when he said this. Paying such a huge price just to cultivate such a final weapon. If it failed again, his heart would drip blood. He wasn't willing to be a famous commander anymore. Ever since the day Zhang Yi was promoted to Epsilon, his authority had been greatly provoked. Yes, Zhang Yi would not interfere with Zhu Zheng's management of the Jiangnan region at all on weekdays. But as long as he was around for a day, anything he said would be more useful than what Zhu Zheng said. It was as if a while ago, he had taken away the satellite control of the Jiangnan region with just a light sentence. Now Zhu Zheng's authority had all been downgraded to second class. This was a feeling that no one could accept. Even at the very beginning, he had once been grateful for having a patron saint like Zhang Yi. However, the dissatisfaction within would slowly accumulate over time. In the end, he decided to get rid of the shackle. Li Lingxue did not look at Zhu Zheng, her eyes were only willing to gaze at the most perfect test subject in her life at this moment. "That's right. We're going to succeed. This is simply the most perfect experiment." Her genes themselves came from that young girl named Yuan Kongyue. She's a born Epsilon. Moreover, her cells can perfectly absorb the origin as well as the abilities of other mutants. Although only half of her genes are retained in her reproductive cells, under our continuous cultivation, sooner or later, her abilities will be close to her original body. Li Lingxue took a deep breath, and although her face maintained its usual calmness, her violently heaving chest displayed her inner excitement. She possesses an infinite ceiling. Blizzard City, Deng's technology. A small golden dragon specimen was placed in the middle of the lab, surrounded by experimenters. Deng Shintong stood in front of the specimen with a rather complicated expression. The head of the lab, Deng Mao, was at the side and said in a low voice, we have taken the biological samples of this dragon. It survived around 600 years ago, around the time of the Ming Dynasty. We attempted to extract the genes in it, trying to decipher whether it contains the power of some speciality. Deng Mao looked at Deng Shentong with an odd expression. However, we didn't find the expected factors that would allow humans to evolve. Deng Shentong closed his eyes and his right hand, which was placed behind him, quietly clenched. Instead, we found that a part of the genetic sequence in it is the same as amber. Is that right? Deng Mao nodded. That woman, she's special. Deng Shentong smiled. In the past, we always said that we were the descendants of dragons. But we ourselves understood that it was just a spiritual belief. After all, no one really thinks they can crawl out from inside an eggshell. But now, I might have to change my thinking. He looked ahead to the lab. Amber was sitting quietly in a chair wearing a white lab coat. Deng Mao said, her genes are special, and this may be the chosen. We can't get the power of a dragon, but she can. This is also good news for you. Amber's ability in the name of love could not give any increase to herself. Her ability was purely auxiliary, protecting herself by craving the love of others. So the stronger she became, the stronger Deng Shentong, who was locked by her at this time, would also become. Deng Shentong looked at Amber in the lab, and after a moment of contemplation, he asked, will this experiment be risky? Deng Mao raised his gold-rimmed glasses, and the color in his eyes did not carry a trace of temperature. As long as it's a human experiment, there are risks. But I can guarantee that her life will be safe. She herself agreed to participate in this experiment. Young lord, at a time like this, please don't disturb the family's grand plan because of your children's personal feelings. Deng Shentong was silent for a long time as he walked to the front of the lab, and through the one-way glass, he reached out and placed his hand on the glass as if to caress the young girl's cheek. After a moment, he put his hand down and said in a deep voice, be sure to conduct the experiment under the premise of ensuring her safety. If he could, he would not choose to risk the lives of others. But today's world had changed, it was more cruel and ruthless. It wasn't like the Deng family didn't have any reaction to what Zhu Zheng's men did. In the middle of such a world, if the Deng family wanted to survive, they had to be ruthless. Chapter 1575 Examining Training Results. Tianhai City, Zhangyi Sanctuary. The construction of the Tianhai City Sanctuary had begun in full swing. The people who had just been sent to Tianhai City were quickly sent here as laborers after being given a certain amount of food as well as shelter. None of those who were able to survive to this day after the end times were weaklings. They all possessed relatively strong physical abilities and cold resistance, and their willpower was also excellent. And some of them were even supernatural ability users. Having these people come over was not a dry meal, they had to work in exchange for food, as well as Zhang Yi's shelter. Zhang Yi did not treat them too harshly either. The creation of the Tianhai City's sanctuary began with the construction of the sky dome with baffling stones, forming a defense barrier just like that of the Holy Spirit Temple of Nash Kingdom. This kind of boulders were converted by Liu Karen with special materials, and each piece was very precious and heavy. Ordinary people simply couldn't carry them. Basically, Uncle Yu took the lead and led a group of reinforcement or beast-type mutants to carry them. As for the others, they were responsible for polishing, stitching, and some other fine technical work. Not far from here was the Heron River that spanned Tianhai City. Nowadays, the Heron River had been completely frozen over, like an alabaster belt tied around the waist of Tianhai City. This morning, the frog Chibaokai emerged from under the ice, two round eyes like a periscope scanning the surroundings. It had been sleeping very well, but it was suddenly awakened by a strong vibration, which made it very unpleasant. Croak! Who disturbed the frog's dream? Croak! The frog looked into the distance with vicious eyes, and soon let it find the culprit. Bai Li Changqing, bare-chested and only wearing a pair of black training pants on the lower half of his body, was leading the 30 members of the Volt Shadow Troop in running training. Steaming hot air rose from their bodies, then quickly condensed into a mist of water and finally turned into frost. 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1. Frog's upper body was lying on the ice, one hand resting on his cheeks and the other tapping the ice breathlessly with 3 fingers. How many yuan stones do you earn in a month? What's the point of playing around so much? It yawned, picking off 2 pieces of ice with its hands and stuffing them into its ears, and continued to burrow under the ice to sleep. And as the Volt Shadow Troop moved forward along the Heron River, they saw the shelter in the middle of large-scale construction. Zhang. Ahem, Supreme's fixing up the shelter again. It's really solid as hell. A mutant said. Xiao Honglian looked at the shelter, her eyes filled with memories. It seemed to go back to 3 years ago, when there was a conflict between them and Zhang Yi. That sensational battle, although it had long been worthless when looking at today, it was still thrilling to think about to this day. You simply don't understand. The Supreme, he is such a person, calculating everything in his mind in order to be able to grasp everything. That's why he was able to become the Supreme. Xiao Honglian said heartily. Xing Tian also let out a long breath of hot air. Yes, I've been optimistic about him since I was a kid. He raised his voice and said to the crowd, in the past, the 2 of us were hairy kids, and I even treated him to spicy fries. The crowd threw Xing Tian an odd look. This guy couldn't get away from Zhang Yi in 3 sentences now, and he focused on mentioning that he and Zhang Yi used to be very familiar with each other. What a way to rub it in. Among the crowd, Ruan Ping couldn't help but narrow his eyes as he looked at the tall shelter and the huge sky dome that was in the process of being created. This is to build an even bigger-sized shelter. Lu Dehai, who was at the side, smiled and asked, "What, do you want to go over and take a look?" When Ruan Ping heard this, he quickly shook his head. No, 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 how am I qualified to go over there? That is where the Supreme lives, we can only look up. Xing Tian hummed proudly, I've been there. Ruan Ping laughed, it's really enviable. Bai Li Changqing heard the speeches of the team members behind him and said in a cold voice, if you want to be favored by that person, exercise well. Only after you have shown enough value will you be qualified to have that one recognize you. For a time, the crowd shouted their slogans even more vigorously, as if they wanted to draw the attention of someone inside that shelter a few kilometers away. And in fact, they were indeed noticed by Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi was wearing a silk pajama, standing barefoot inside his bedroom. The floor was emitting warm air currents, and even with bare feet, one would feel a warmth all the way up along the center of his feet. He stood at the window and took out his telescopic device to bring the lens closer, and the first thing he saw was Bai Li Changqing's muscular upper body. Behind him, the 30 members of the Volt Shadow Troop, both male and female, each and every one of them were not wearing combat uniforms, but only the most basic training clothes, running in a neat military formation in the midst of the -60-degree weather. Zhang Yi couldn't help but tickle the corner of his mouth. This fellow. Still playing mind games with me. Behind her, on the bed, Zhou Qi was wearing a black pajamas. The sheen of silk could hardly hide the delicacy of her skin. She crossed her legs, her white and tender feet swaying in a leisurely manner. Hearing Zhang Yi's words, Zhou Qi came with a curious smile. Zhang Yi, who is it? Zhang Yi said, Bai Li Changqing. Brought the team over to show me the results of their training. During this time, Zhang Yi hadn't cared much about the training of the Volt Shadow Troop. However, Bai Li Changqing wanted to show some of their results in front of him, so they had specially dragged all of them to the neighborhood. Zhou Qi reached out and made a point in midair, and the intelligence system in the room immediately displayed an image of the Volt Shadow Troop on the glass. Seeing those hard-working mutants, Zhou Qi gave a gentle smile. It seems decent. It feels like it's not too far behind the Yan Yunwei of Blizzard City. Zhang Yi said indifferently, comparing with the ordinary Yan Yunwei is not meaningful in the slightest. If you want to compare, you should also compare with the mutants of the investigation force. Zhou Qi said, however, their training time is still too short. the supernatural aspect hasn't been effectively practiced either. Zhang Yi said, I will speed up their improvement. After all, I don't have that much time to wait for them to grow slowly. Shokir said, are you planning to pluck the seedlings? With drugs? Zhang Yi said, observe them for a while longer, and if they are talented, cultivate them with more care for a while. If the talent is not good and the upper limit is limited, why not directly stimulate it with drugs? What I need are mutants that can be put to use as soon as possible. He thought about it and sent a voice over to Yan Xinxin. After training for more than a month, it's time for me, the principal, to test the results of their training. Yang Xinxin replied, okay, I'll have them prepare. The planned inspection will begin tomorrow.